that teaches exactly what's happening. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. Look it up. Fact check me on this. That teaches exactly what's happening. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. Look it up. Fact check me on this. It was first proposed in 1966 at Columbia University by a professor named Richard Clower. And you know who went to Columbia? Who was taught this curriculum at Columbia? Well, lots of notable presidents, cabinet secretaries, and attorney generals. To name a few, remember 2016, who was president? Oh, Obama. Yeah, he went to Columbia. Madeleine Albright, U.S. Secretary of State. Anthony Blinken, current U.S. Secretary of State. Harold Brown, previous Secretary of Defense. Bill Barr, the previous Attorney General. Eric Holder, the Attorney General before him. And this is just to name a few, right? So what exactly is the Cloward-Piven strategy that they teach there? Well, it's a strategy to speed up the fall and collapse of capitalism by systematically overwhelming the government systems with a flood of impossible demands. And it ends up pushing society into a crisis and an economic collapse in order to, get this, bring down America and the entire capitalist system. Yes, this is real. This is what they teach. Cloward-Piven strategy. Look it up. Now, this Cloward-Piven strategy teaches people how to overwhelm the system with massive spending, entitlements, and debt. Sound familiar? And the goal is literally to collapse the entire economy, wipe out the middle class, and bring a nation down to their knees, begging the government to save them. So what's this strategy all about exactly? Let's dig into it a little bit. Now, in the 1966 article, Cloward and Piven, that was his wife, they charged that the ruling classes, the rich, used welfare to weaken the poor, and that by providing a social safety net, that the rich were basically holding the poor people down. They were preventing them from rebelling. They said in the paper, quote, "Poor people can advance only when the rest of society is afraid of them," end quote. Cloward told the New York Times this, quote, on September 27th, 1970. Now, rather than giving the poor, government handouts, wrote Cloward and Piven, activists should work to sabotage and destroy the welfare system because, as they said in their own words, the collapse of the welfare state would ignite a political and financial crisis that would rock the nation. Poor people would rise in revolt, and only then would the rest of society accept their demands. What a strategy. Now, the key to sparking this rebellion would be to expose the inadequacy of the welfare state. Cloward-Piven's early promoters cited radical organizer Saul Alinsky as their inspiration. You might recognize that name, Saul Alinsky. He wrote a book called Rules of Radicals. It's what Obama says that he read. It's what Hillary Clinton said they read. If you read the book, it's going to explain a lot of what's going on. One of the things that he wrote in his book is something saying, quote, "Make the enemy live up to their own book of rules." So, when pressed to honor every word of every law and every statute, every moral tenet and every implicit promise of the liberal social construct, human agencies inevitably fall short. The system's failure to, quote, live up to its rule book can then be used to discredit it altogether and to replace the capitalist rule book with a socialist one. So that explains the plan. But how did they plan to implement it? Okay, well, a key component of the plan involved fooling the voters by calling yourself moderate and a uniter, even though you're a radical Marxist, and to never, ever admit what you really believe in. It involved demonizing your opponents by calling them evil, greedy, extreme, radical, and a terrorist. Look in the mirror and call your opponents the very things that you are. The plan teaches to always hide your true intentions, or in other words, lie or misrepresent, whatever you want to call it. Obamacare is about saving the uninsured as opposed to, income redistribution. Government regulations are to protect us from global warming as opposed to, wiping out small businesses. Amnesty for illegal immigration is about fairness as opposed to creating 12 million new Democratic voters. Now, the key to it all is to, what they say, boil the frog slowly. So by the time he realizes what's happening, he'd be cooked. The authors of this strategy proposed a, quote, massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. They calculated that by persuading even a fraction of potential welfare recipients to demand their entitlements, it would bankrupt the entire system. The result, they predicted, would be a, quote, a profound financial and political crisis that would unleash, quote, powerful forces for major economic reforms at the national level. Now, this article also called for, quote, aggressive organizers, end quote, to use demonstrations to create a climate of militancy. Now, they would use carefully orchestrated media campaigns. They would float the idea of a federal program of income redistribution in the form of a guaranteed living income for all. Like a universal basic income for working and non-working people alike. Is this starting to sound familiar? Now, the plan's goal was to mobilize the poor people in mass, to overwhelm government agencies with a flood of demands beyond the capacity of those agencies to meet. Sort of like what we're seeing in Italy. Sort of like what we're seeing at the southern border. Now, they would do this in hopes of breaking the budget, jam the bureaucratic gears into gridlock, and bring the entire system crashing down. Fear, turmoil, violence, and economic collapse would accompany such a breakdown, providing perfect conditions for fostering radical change. At least, that was the theory anyway. Now, I know that sounds bad.